Welcome to the Something About Sandy Film Fight Podcast with your host, Ash Baker.
Yes, it's true. It's time for another episode of the Something About Sandy Film Fight Podcast, the podcast that takes the best and worst films on a given theme, dresses them up in a ton of prosthetics, and makes them dance for you until we can crown a winner. I'm your host Ash Baker, and let's sashay to the front of the stage and belt out those power ballads, shall we? This week's theme is...
Eddie Murphy, Norbits, his chance of an Oscar.
Back in 2007, Eddie Murphy was riding high on the success of a critically lauded supporting performance in Dreamgirls, the tale of fame and racism in 1960s pop music. He won the Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor and was nominated for the same award at the Oscars. Given the track record of these awards, he was basically guaranteed to win it by all accounts, and he would have been a pretty safe bet down the bookies. However, in the lead up to the ceremony, Norbit was released, seeing him once again don the prosthetics and play multiple roles in what the press notes optimistically describe as a comedy. Norbit was like the tramp who gets on a bus after a particularly smelly bin dive, causing everyone to shuffle away from him and open all the windows. The Oscar voters made their excuses, averted their gaze, and gave the award to Alan Arkin instead. Now, it's probably too simplistic to say that Norbit was the only reason that Murphy missed out on an Oscar, and I'm sure there are many reasons why. Not least Alan Arkin's performance, I guess. But it certainly makes for a nice narrative, even if it's just to provide comfort to those people who put their life savings on Murphy winning the award. So to investigate further, I'll be putting the award-winning Dreamgirls up against the film that exists, Norbit. But what's going to happen? Does Dreamgirls leave us feeling a bit flat? Does Norbit hit all the right notes? Let's find out. But be careful. Those spoilers, much like Norbit's wife Rasputia, really do come out of nowhere and squash you flat if you're not careful. First up, we've got Dreamgirls, and here are the facts.
Year of release.
2006.
Directed by...
Bill Condon.
Starring...
Beyonce, Jamie Foxx, Jennifer Hudson, and Eddie Murphy.
Running time.
2 hours and 10 minutes.
Current Rotten Tomatoes rating.
78%.
Budget.
$70 million.
Worldwide box office takings.
$155 million.
Where to watch.
It's on Netflix. Dreamgirls tells the story of the Dreamettes, a girl group in Detroit who dream of becoming big stars. A smarmy used car salesman, Curtis, takes them under his wing and starts to steer them through the murky waters of the pop business and race relations of the 60s and 70s America, using them to create his own music empire in the process. When he demotes Effie, the lead singer, for the more marketable Dina, tensions flare and threaten to destabilise the group. Their ascent to superstardom comes at a price. Is it a price they're willing to pay to have everything they've ever dreamed of? So Dreamgirls started life as a Broadway musical in the 80s and was converted for the screen in the mid-noughties. And the first thing for me is that I didn't feel that it was really able to free itself from the shackles of the stage show. Now let me be clear. I love musicals and I'm often left feeling amazed at seeing a particularly clever piece of set design or costume change, so I don't mean to sound disparaging of stage productions here. But clearly, one of the appeals of shooting something as a film is that you're not tied to the restrictions of a stage. Obviously, it's the same story and songs, so there's only so much you can alter, but I felt that they could have been more creative and imaginative and break free from those shackles. This is particularly interesting given the success of Chicago a few years before, a film that did something really inventive and imaginative with the script. They brought in the same screenwriter to adapt this one too, but maybe you couldn't repeat the same trick twice. The music in this was good, but pretty forgettable. There are the big songs that are well known, the big belter ballads of And I'm Telling You and Listen, plus the disco version of One Night Only, but other than that they were largely background noise, probably not helped by the fact that they were frequently done over montage scenes to move the story along. I'm assuming another hangover from the stage play. I also don't get the constant need for characters to sing about themselves in the third person, although maybe I should start trying that. Ash Baker wants to keep recording his podcast. I don't know, could work. The subject of race was raised in this film, but it felt quite crowbarred in. I agree it's a very important subject, and discussion about how much black artists quote-unquote needed to rein in their blackness to appeal to a white audience is a really fascinating topic, and something still being discussed 15 years later. The Jimmy Earl performances in Miami reminded me of Green Book from a few years ago, and the whitification of their songs definitely had echoes of both Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and One Night in Miami, released earlier this year, and certainly the references to a song being a message song was reminiscent of the latter. However, those three films I mentioned all discussed it far better than Dreamgirls, where it felt rushed and not given the time it deserved. There were some nice touches. For example, the hairstyles at the start were mega straight, with quiffs and wigs, but as they regained more of their identity towards the end of the film, they allowed themselves to wear more naturally Afro-American hairstyles. But the occasional reference to things outside, for example Martin Luther King speeches and civil unrest in the streets, felt a bit rushed. I feel that it either needed to give more airtime to them or take them out completely. In the current amount, it felt crowbarred in to make it seem more relevant. However, in saying all that, overall I did enjoy the film. The story was engaging, and I liked that we got to see them go from nobodies all the way to the top. I liked being able to see the shady parts of the music business too, and the film had some nice flair touches, for example how the state of the recording equipment improved as the girls and the label became more successful. The performances in this elevate any deficiencies in the script. I thought Jamie Foxx was really great as the charismatic hustler who had a real mean streak. The way he inveigles his way in and then becomes controlling without the girls realising it is really well done, and he comes across as the right level of sleazy. I was surprised not to see him get more award nominations for this. Jennifer Hudson was Effie, and it's hard to think now, but she was a relative newcomer at the time, but has more than enough stage presence to command the attention well. Her voice isn't quite to my taste, as I often find she lacks subtlety, and that is definitely true here, with And I'm Telling You starting at about a 13 out of 10, and then building from there. In fact, I was quite shocked when her version of One Night Only ended on a quiet bit. I thought she was ill. Beyoncé is great as the reluctant frontwoman who eventually finds the strength to be her own person. She's a side character in her own life for a lot of it, and not knowing the story beforehand, I found it really weird that a superstar like Beyoncé was being sidelined, although she steps into the limelight in the second act, which makes perfect sense. And she also gets her own power ballad too, which was great to hear. The supporting cast are good. Annika Noni Rose plays the third Dreamette Laurel with a wide-eyed naive charm that manages to avoid being annoying. And Danny Glover is good as the old school manager that helps both Jimmy and Effie with their fledgling careers. And then of course there's Eddie Murphy. I really enjoyed his performance as the bad boy soul singer, seemingly channeling Little Richard and James Brown with his energetic and powerful performances. It was great to see Murphy go back to the 80s swagger and trademark smile. And he can really sing. It's easy to forget he had a pop career in the 80s, so it came as a bit of a surprise. But he's not half bad. All in all, while I felt this film had some issues with being too beholden to the stage version, the songs not being memorable, and the issue of race being brushed over, I felt like it was an engaging story with some great performances to see you through. So I certainly think you should watch it. My official rating is...
flawed, but still worth a watch.
Next up, it's Norbit. And yes, these are the facts.
Year of release.
2007.
Directed by...
Brian Robbins.
Starring...
Eddie Murphy, Tandy Newton, Cuba Gooding Jr. and Terry Crews.
Running time.
1 hour and 43 minutes.
Current Rotten Tomatoes rating.
9%.
Budget.
$60 million.
Worldwide box office takings.
$159.8 million.
Where to watch.
It's also on Netflix. Norbit tells the story of a timid man who's trapped in a loveless and abusive marriage to the repulsive Rasputia. His life is turned upside down when his old orphanage friend and first love, Kate, comes back to town. This leads Norbit to attempt to escape his current situation, split Kate up from her fiancé, and all while trying to avoid a painful retribution from Rasputia and her 3 thug brothers. Will he make things right and get the girl? Will he make it to the end of the film in one piece? Do we care? Well, where to start with this one? 6 key questions came to mind as I was watching this. So how about we go through those? Question 1. Eddie Murphy, what happened to you? He burst onto the scene in the 80s as an acerbic and quick-talking comic whose razor-sharp wit made him one of the funniest people on the planet. even if some of his material now would need to come with a sensitive warning for very outdated views. In the 90s, he started to reinvent himself in family comedies, with Doolittle, The Nutty Professor and Daddy Daycare, none of which were masterpieces, but had a certain charm and entertained the intended audience, i.e. families. Norbit, however, seems like a film made by someone who had so much arrogance and so little regard for his audience that he's quite happy to churn out any old rubbish, believing that basically he could do anything and the audiences would still lap it up. Either that, or it speaks of someone so devoid of ideas and confidence that they've forgotten how to produce good content, and this is a cry for help. Either way, we shouldn't encourage this sort of behaviour by giving him any more money for it. He plays 3 characters in this. The titular Norbit, who I actually don't mind, even if he was a bit wet. The horrible Respucia, who you must have spent about 5 seconds writing, given how much apparent thought went into creating her character. And the orphanage owner, Mr. Wong, who I think must have had even less writing time and effort than Respucia. I suppose it does show some range for Murphy, going from mediocre to bad to truly terrible, which is a skill in itself. Question 2. Why was there a weird trend in the noughties for black male comedians to use prosthetics to turn into women? We had Martin Lawrence in Big Mama's House and several sequels, and we also had the Wayans brothers in White Chicks. Unfortunately, this is a question that no one knows the answer to, even the people that made them. 3. Can you be racist against yourself? I didn't realise you could, but Norbit seems to deliver a resounding yes. This film is incredibly racist, mainly through the use of completely outdated stereotypes. Respucia is a sassy large black woman caricature that felt like Murphy had never actually met a woman in real life. And oh, did I mention she's fat? The film is obsessed with this, making the joke about her weight at least 20 times, if not more. Now don't get me wrong, I've probably laughed at fat jokes in my life, nobody's perfect. But just saying someone is fat isn't enough to make it funny. This was easily the laziest part of the film, and that's saying something. And why does she keep saying, "How you doing?" through the film? Does she think she's Joey from Friends? The other characters weren't much better. There are a couple of pimps in this, looking like they've driven straight out of a 50 Cent video in flashy suits and driving around in low-rider cars. The Thug brothers were pretty two-dimensional, but not as aggressively offensive as Respucia. The worst case of racism, however, is Mr. Wong, the Chinese restaurant/orphanage owner. Eddie Murphy is doing a very bad Chinese accent, and even gets called out for being racist at one point. Recognising you're doing it doesn't excuse it, Mr. Murphy. Oh, and they also throw in a trip to Mexico at the end, just to make sure they get one more stereotype in before the running time ends. I've heard defences of South Park in the past that say they get away with being so offensive because they're offensive towards everyone. So maybe that's what Norbit was going for. But the crucial difference here is that South Park has well-crafted jokes that are cutting and funny, whereas the humour in Norbit is just really lazy. Question 4. Are we supposed to find an abusive relationship funny? The central relationship between Respucia and Norbit just made me feel really uncomfortable. It was played for laughs, but because none of the jokes landed, it came across as horrible and abusive, and you felt like phoning up social services in the hope they could make it stop. Towards the end it reminded me of Cinderella, especially when they locked him up in the cellar and wouldn't let him go to the wedding. And the 3 brothers Grimm play the part of the ugly stepsisters. I think I would have actually preferred it if they'd made more of the Cinderella parody, but the film is so devoid of creative ideas, I suspect this would have been beyond them. 5. What were those actors thinking? This film has some big stars in it, which makes it even more disappointing it's this bad. It felt really half-arsed from Terry Crews as Big Black Jack. Yes, that is his character name. Which is such a shame when you see how funny and sparkling he is in something like Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Cuba Gooding Jr. looked like he didn't want to be there. Maybe he was just on a flying visit to pick up the cheque, I'm not sure. And then there's obviously Murphy himself, but we've covered him already. The only star to come out with any dignity at all is Tandy Newton, who's actually fairly good as the sweet Kate, but unfortunately she couldn't save the movie all on her own. And finally, question 6. Is there anything redeeming about this film? Surprisingly, it wasn't 100% bad. The character of Norbit grew on me as the film progressed, and by the end I was rooting for him to get the girl. The romance between Norbit and Kate was actually quite sweet, although maybe that was the charisma of Tandy Newton, who managed to pull it through. These were the parts of the film where I wanted to gouge my eyes out the least, which in this film is high praise indeed. Believe it or not, there were also a couple of laughs sprinkled through the film. I think I chuckled twice, mainly from the 2 pimp characters, although unfortunately this was nowhere near enough to make up for the complete laugh-free zone of the rest of the film. In summary, this is a truly awful film. Saying that does not bring me any pleasure, as there will have been a whole cast and crew of people who put in a lot of effort to bring this to the screen, but unfortunately all of that effort was wasted on this completely redundant piece of filmmaking. The characters are so offensively bad, I'm surprised the actors could perform them without wanting to be sick. The film is not funny enough, and the writing is so poor that it's a real struggle to make it to the end. This is definitely one to avoid. My official rating is...
How the hell did this even get made?
Biggest meanie of the week.
Hands down, it's Respucia this week. Jamie Foxx gets an honourable mention as the insidious and sleazy manager, but Respucia is just out and out nasty with no redeeming qualities. So Respucia is the biggest meanie for this week. Oh yes, it's Top Trumps time again.
Top trumps, top trumps, top trumps, top trumps, top trumps.
Who's going to win this week? Our first category is...
Things that make you say, wow.
Dreamgirls had a few standout moments, mainly the big power singing from J Hud and Beyonce, but Norbit takes this round with ease. There were loads of times that made you say, wow, and not in a good way. Round 2.
Infidelities.
Norbit has 2 as both Respucia and Norbit go straying, but Dreamgirls wins this one with at least 5, most of them involving Curtis. 3.
Fat jokes and references.
One of the key plot points in Dreamgirls was that Effie was overweight, and I read that J Hud was asked to put on about 20 pounds for this role. However, that absolutely pales into comparison to Norbit, where Respucia's weight is constantly referred to throughout the film. Ironically, the joke wore very thin very quickly, so Norbit takes this round. 4.
Divas!
Respucia is one hell of a diva, being bossy and demanding and making people run around after her. But Dreamgirls has 2 for the price of 1 with Jennifer Hudson and Beyonce, so I've got to give it to Dreamgirls.
Special bonus round.
As a little bonus this week, it's a top trump within a top trump. Who wins between Jennifer Hudson and Beyonce? I've got to say this is a tough one. As I mentioned before, Hudson's style is not really for me, and I felt Beyonce sung her big number so much better. Her singing was just effortless, but powerful and emotional, whereas Hudson can sometimes sound a bit forced. However, Hudson had 2 big songs to Beyonce's 1, and her character was also the bigger diva throughout the film, so I think I've got to give the win to Jennifer Hudson. 5.
Sleazebags.
Cuba Gooding Jr. was quite smarmy as the philandering fiancé, although he might as well have had sleazebag tattooed on his forehead when he came on the screen. It wasn't exactly a surprise. However, the win goes this week to Curtis, played by Jamie Foxx. He was great as the sleazy manager who slowly takes control. You really took against him, but in a way that felt believable. So Dreamgirls takes that round.
And the winner is...
Norbit got 2, but Dreamgirls took 3 rounds, plus had a bonus round, which we'll call a half. So Dreamgirls wins this week's Top Trumps 3.5 to 2. And now for the final summary. The films will have obviously been in production at different times, so it's probably more of a coincidence that they came out so closely together. Although maybe not a coincidence that Norbit came out so close to the Oscars, as I suspect the studio saw it as the sort of lightweight nonsense they could use as counter-programming to cater for people who don't want to watch worthy award contenders. There are no two ways about it. Norbit is an awful film. The poor script is delivered by horrible performances, leaving you feel dirty after watching it and making you want to expunge it from your memory. Norbit is most definitely an Eddie Murphy film. Written, co-directed by him, as well as him playing 3 of the main characters. So if the film goes down, he's going down with it. As mentioned before, I thought some aspects of his performance weren't too bad, mainly when he was playing Norbit, but Respucia and Mr. Wong are so eye-wateringly bad that it's easy to see why people blame this for ruining Murphy's chance of winning the Oscar, but I don't think it's quite as simple as that. Dreamgirls has its issues too. I felt that there were problems with the script, how it was adapted for the screen, its discussion of race, and how forgettable a lot of the songs were. But if we're just looking at Murphy's performance, then he's great as the star who can't cope with being moulded into something he isn't and his life spirals around him. But was it an Oscar-worthy performance? I'm not so sure. I enjoyed it, but he didn't grab me emotionally, and I wasn't that sad when he died towards the end. I would have preferred to see Jamie Foxx get more award nods, but I wonder if strategically Dreamgirls felt the supporting actor category was a better bet, so put their efforts there instead. Who knows? This week's theme reminded me of the first episode I did in this podcast series, comparing Sandra Bullock in her Oscar-winning role in The Blind Side against her Razzie Award-winning performance in All About Steve. In both cases, the Oscar contender was a more serious film, and the alternative was a knockabout comedy. But All About Steve at least had some character to it, and looked like Sandra Bullock was trying her best with what was a pretty shoddy script, whereas it looked like everyone in Norbit had just given up. I would say that Dreamgirls is better than Blindside, but Norbit is worse than All About Steve. But anyway, back to this week's theme. There is definitely a clear winner, or should I say there's a clear loser. Norbit is just depressingly bad, so that has to lose by knockout. Although it did it by accidentally punching itself in the face rather than anything Dreamgirls did. I enjoyed Dreamgirls, but I'm not quite sure why it garnered so many awards as it did at the time. But I never want to see Norbit again.
I hope that someone gets my. I hope that someone gets my. I hope that someone gets my message to the podcast.
Thanks as always for getting in touch and letting me know your thoughts on the podcast. Dan very kindly took the time to share the podcast and write a lovely review on Facebook. And thankfully for me, he didn't stop there. He also gave me some great ideas for future themes, such as stop-motion animation and railway films. I like the fact that Dan has gone for the really random straight away. We're clearly on the same wavelength. I took part in my first #FollowFriday on Twitter this week, and it was great to give some love back to several other podcasters who have made great content and given me support over the past few weeks. Particular mention goes to the GameForAMovie podcast, who returned the favour and included me in their Follow Friday tweet. Check them out if you haven't already. 4 friends get together to chat, play silly games and review some very good films and some very, very bad films. You can check out the GameForAMovie podcast on all the main podcast providers. In other news, this podcast is also now on YouTube. Search for the Something About Sandy Film Fight podcast and you can find full episodes and trailers for all the films, and I'll also try and upload extra bonus content as and when I get the chance to do so. Please check it out, like, subscribe, click the bell icon, and do all the other stuff that YouTubers always tell you to do. Why not join in the fun and get in touch with me? The email is somethingaboutsandifilmpod@gmail.com, and it's sasfilmpod on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. So that's it for another episode. Do you agree with my reviews? Do you want to sing from the rooftops about how great Dreamgirls is? Are you one of the few people who actually enjoyed Norbit? And if so, how? If you're enjoying the podcast, then please leave a review and share it with anyone you think might be interested. You'd obviously be doing me a favour, but moreover, you'd be doing your friend a favour if they end up liking the pod. So basically, it's a win-win situation. So, thanks goes to you for listening for all of these episodes so far. And a special thanks goes to Joe Baker for all the music, and Alison Moore for the voiceover work. See you next time on the Something About Sandy Film Fight podcast.